Verse 1. Now Haggai, the prophet, and Zechariah the prophet, a descendant of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel, who was over them. Haggai, Zechariah, contemporaries to Ezra. These two prophets were called upon God to encourage the people to resume the rebuilding of the temple. They knew, of course, that there had been a decree from Cyrus, king of Persia, which granted them permission to rebuild Jerusalem. They knew it was God's will, God's time to rebuild the city. Haggai called them the Lord's messenger. Zechariah was an entirely different type of individual. Zechariah always had his head in the clouds. He had tremendous visions, a message to match. He appealed to the emotions of the people. He spoke to their hearts. These two men together, Haggai and Zechariah, spoke to the conscience and the heart of Israel. Apparently, Haggai was considered the leader, but both of them encouraged the people to resume the building program. It would be very profitable at this juncture to read, maybe for your quiet time daily, the books of Haggai and Zechariah. Verse 2 and 3 now of Ezra chapter 5. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, set to work to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. And the prophets of God were with them, helping them. At that time, Tattenai, governor of Euphrates, of Trans-Euphrates, and of Shether, Bozenai, and their associates went to them and asked, "Who authorized you," notice their question, "who authorized you to rebuild this temple and restore the structure?" When work was resumed, friends, their enemies hear about it. They are told that Tattenai was a Persian governor of the Sumerian place, and Shether Bozenai was probably a high official. They come and they challenge the workmen. They say, "What's the big idea?" Notice their question, "Who authorized you to rebuild this temple and to restore the structure?" Now, the answer they give them is really not an answer at all. You notice they begin with Tattenai and his crowd are enemies, and you notice how they answer it. They are men of the world, and the Jews are not about to cast their pearls before these people. Would they understand if they said that God told them to rebuild? After all, the secret of the Lord is with them that fear him. Psalm 25 verse 14. It is only with those who fear him, with no one else. The natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit, for they are foolishness to him, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 14. They answered, "A fool according to his folly." Proverbs 26 verse 4. Answer a fool according to his folly. In fact, they answered their question by asking a question. Verse 4, Ezra chapter 5 and verse 4. They also asked, "What are the names of the men constructing this building?" What are the names? Sort of trying to cause them to fear. A threat, a very veiled sort of threat. Now notice verse 5 of Ezra chapter 5. But the eye of their God was watching over the elders of the Jews, and they were not stopped until a report could go to Darius, and his written reply be received. How comforting, friends! But the eye of the Lord was watching over them. This is the wonderful thing, that if you can depend on God, He would keep His eye on those who love Him. So off goes another letter to the king of Syria. By this time, there is a change of guard, as it were, Darius has taken over as king. Apparently, about 7 years has gone by. The people must be getting very frustrated. Verses 6 and 7. This is a copy of the letter that Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar Bonzenai, and their associates and officials of Trans-Euphrates sent to Darius. The report they sent read as follows. To King Darius, these men, Tattenai and his associates, Tattenai was the governor of Trans-Euphrates. Notice how deceitful, insidious they are. One letter wasn't profitable, and now they write another letter. Very warm, cordial greetings for the start. Verse 8. The king should know that we went to the district of Judah, to the temple of the great God. The people are building it with large stones and placing timbers in the walls. The work is being carried on with diligence and is making rapid progress under their direction. As you can see, friends, the thought in this letter is, we happened to see, we didn't go there to spy this out. We are not really their enemies. We happened to be in the neighborhood and stopped by for a little visit, and this is what we found. We questioned the elders and asked them, verses 9 and 10, who authorized you to rebuild this temple and restore the structure? We also asked them the names so that they could write down the names of their leaders for your information. They were told the names of the prophets Haggai and Zechariah. This is the answer they gave us. We are the servants of the God of heaven, and we are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, one that a great king of Israel built and finished. They give them the history of the captivity, which had occurred about 70 years ago. Verses 12 and 13 now. But because our fathers angered the God of heaven. Notice the expression, the God of heaven. The God of Israel is not a parochial local deity. He is the God of heaven. He handed over Nebuchadnezzar the Chaldean, king of Babylon, who destroyed this temple and deported the people to Babylon. However, in the first year of King Cyrus of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild this house of God. They gave them concrete evidence that King Cyrus had commanded them to rebuild the temple. He even sent the temple vessels back to them. Amazing 2 verses now, friends, verses 14 and 15. He even removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles from the temple of Babylon. Notice there are 2 temples here. The temple of Babylon and the temple in Jerusalem. Cyrus removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem and brought them to the temple in Babylon. Notice the juxtaposition here. Nebuchadnezzar takes it from Jerusalem temple and places it in Babylonian temple. Cyrus, the king of Persia, takes the same things from the Babylonian temple and gives it back to the Jerusalem temple. Strange and mysterious are God's ways. Then King Cyrus gave them to a man named Sheshbazzar, who had been appointed governor. And he told him, take these articles and go and deposit them in the temple in Jerusalem and rebuild the house of God on its site. Rebuild the house of God in its site. The letter, friends, concludes with this request. Verse 17. Now, if it pleases the king, let a search be made in the royal archives of Babylon to see if Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem. Then let the king send us his decision in this matter. The enemies did not believe that a decree had ever been made by Cyrus. But the letter is saying that the Jews' claim of such a decree is the basis on which they are rebuilding. So they ask that a search be made. They are certain that no such decree exists and that these people are doing this on their own. Verse 1 of chapter 6, King Darius then issued an order, and they searched in the archives stored in the treasury at Babylon. He immediately works on this particular letter that he receives. They went down to the basement, as it were, somewhere, dug out the old archives, and then brought it to King Darius. A scroll was found in the citadel of Ecbatana, in the province of Media, and this was written on it, memorandum. In the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem. Let the temple be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices, and let its foundations be laid. It is to be 90 feet high and 90 feet wide. Also, the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, are to be returned to their place in the temple in Jerusalem. They are to be deposited in the house of God. Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple, and now it is to be returned in its proper place, Jerusalem. It was all recorded there. All of this unearthed by King Darius. He never would have known about this decree if the enemy hadn't brought it to his attention. Notice how it boomerangs on the enemy. This was a real blunder on the part of the enemies of the Jews. Now this is the message that King Darius sends to Tattenai. Now then, Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shetha-Bonzenai, and you, their fellow officials of that province, stay away from there. Do not interfere with the work on this temple of God. Let the governor of the Jews and the Jewish elders rebuild this house of God on its site. Amazing, isn't it, friends? Tattenai was a governor with an important job, and he thought he could stop the building of the temple in Jerusalem, but when the decree of Cyrus was located and the present King Darius realizes that it was the law of the Medes and the Persians, and it could not be altered or changed, so he makes a further decree. Moreover, I hereby decree, that you are to do for these elders of the Jews in the construction of the house of God. The expenses of these men are to be fully paid out of the royal treasury from the revenues of Trans-Euphrates, so that the work will not be stopped. Their initial letter was that the empire would suffer in its revenue, in its finances. Now the king says, we'll pay them for building their temple out of our royal treasury, out of our revenue. Notice, friends, just one footnote: if God be for us, who can be against us? Verse 9 now. Whatever is needed, young bulls, rams, male lambs, for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, oil, as requested by the priests in Jerusalem, must be given them daily without fail, so that they may offer sacrifices pleasing to the God of heaven and pay for the well-being of the king and his sons. What a decree this was. Also he decrees a severe penalty upon anyone who would hinder the work. But notice, friends, whatever is needed, young bulls, rams, males, wheat, salt, wine, oil, daily without fail, that they would offer sacrifices pleasing to God for the well-being of the king and the sons. When God gives, what can we say? He gives completely. He lavishes. Christ's satisfaction fills every fraction. That's it, friends. Let go. Let God have his wonderful way. Take your hands off. When you take your hands off, God puts his hands on. It's better to allow God to bless us than we bless ourselves with some puny, insignificant blessings. Let God have his way, friends. This is what God does. Mysterious God who's moving in mysterious ways. Verse 11, furthermore, I decree that if anyone changes this edict, a beam is to be pulled from his house. He is to be lifted up and impaled on it. Can you imagine? And for this crime his house is to be made a pile of rubble. At this point, friends, you would find it thrilling to read the book of Haggai and also Zechariah. They are marvelous. We designate them as minor prophets, but really, they are major men in the Old Testament. What can we say of this God, friends? There's this little Sunday school song I'm sure all of us know. My God is so big, so strong, so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. Verse 14. So the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai, the prophet, and Zechariah, a descendant of Iddo. They finished building the temple according to the command of the God of Israel and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, Artaxerxes, the kings of Persia. The temple is rebuilt under the inspiration of his prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. There is an ocean of God's love available. There is plenty for everyone. May God grant you never to doubt that victorious love, whatever the circumstances, depressing circumstances. Friends, are God's laboratory where he specializes to exhibit his power.